We left our group, beaten and bloodied, on the side of a riverbank outside Ferngrove, a small town largely populated by gnomes and ghostwise halflings. At the request of Captain Bramble Swiftshot, captain of the Rangers there, they had taken care of a problem which had been causing the citizens issues. They decided the best course of action would be to return to the town, find food and beds, and ale for Bjorn, before embarking on any further escapades. Callie led the way, his extensive blood loss meaning that a couple of times he veered slightly off the path, but his survivalist instincts meant he soon got back on track. As the party neared Ferngrove, a group of halfling rangers seemed to apparate from the trees, the leader stepping up to Callie. In his head, the fighter heard, "Oh, you've returned. I take it you were successful?" Callie immediately turned to Zinna. She responded that she wasn't doing anything. Realizing it was the halfling, Callie spoke out loud, asking if he could please stop doing that as he was tired and sore and just wanted to go to bed. The halfling apologised verbally and the other rangers gathered around the group protectively, escorting them back to the town hall. Yancey kept a lookout for the llama, but did not see the animal. Bramble was pleasantly surprised by their return and thanked them profusely. She added that they had now earned the trust of Ferngrove and as such were free to roam the town. Room and board would be free of charge for the night at the Lathan Grain Tavern, and if they were looking for further work, it would be worth speaking with Lord Dongle Oaknut, the head of the noble family of Ferngrove. After inquiring about the type of shops in the town, the group decided to head to the blacksmith first. Asher followed silently at the back, sadly counting his arrows. The interior of the smithy was hot, the scent of scalding metal in the air. A small selection of weaponry was on display, but there was no sign of a proprietor. At the back they could see a few stone steps descending, and a hammer appeared to be lifting itself and slamming down onto metal with a loud clang. Callie called out a greeting, and the hammer stopped. A female gnome made her way up the stairs, her muscular physique covered with a sheen of sweat. "Can I help you?" The group asked what she could do for them, and she reeled off a list of items she could craft or improve. Bjorn was interested in modifying his crossbow, but finding out the cost would be 50 gold, he unsuccessfully attempted to negotiate a discount. Eager to help, Zinna emptied out her bag, the rest of the group staring in astonishment at the sheer amount of random items they had no idea how or when she'd acquired. As she placed the owlbear plushie and yellow blanket down, Zinna noted the gnome's eyes go wide for a second before she composed herself once more. Callie decided to pay 10 gold to have his shield strengthened, purchasing a couple of hand axes to replace the ones he'd lost to the river. Cora also purchased a new dagger with a lovely red-bound handle. Yancey asked in Dwarvish whether she could make his mace look cooler. Bjorn stared at him, confused as to why he was speaking Dwarvish to a gnome. The blacksmith, whose name was Hefty Strongarm, just stared at him before replying in Common that she hadn't understood a word. He repeated himself in Common, and she was obviously excited by the chance to exercise her creative flair, so much so that she offered to do it free of charge. Yancey handed over his mace, leaving the shop feeling slightly embarrassed. Hefty, who was busy examining the mace, asked what sort of thing he was looking for, only realizing he had gone when she received no reply. Callie volunteered that he disliked pink, and Bjorn mentioned that Yancey was fond of flowers. Callie also threw in that a large purple head on the mace would please the cleric. Hefty took note of all this, adding that she might make it more spiky. Callie asked whether she could smelt some metal into arrowheads. She looked at him as if he was stupid. Of course. He handed over the selection of copper cogs he had acquired from Sandrak's tower in Rycroft, and Zinna handed over her crowbar. Hefty advised them to come back in the morning, and they made their way back outside. As they left, Zinna placed the plushie and blanket carefully by the door. The next stop was the general goods store. Grove Goods was owned and managed by Simmel Flamebush, another gnome female. A warm smile beamed from a face surrounded by red hair as they entered. A selection of basic goods and some well-made wooden toys adorned the shelves. Zinna asked about purchasing some arrows and for 1 gold received a batch of 20. Bjorn purchased bolts for his crossbow, neither of them taking Simmel up on her offer of gift wrapping. Asher was delighted as he slid 1 gold piece across the counter. Too overwhelmed to speak, he simply nodded as Simmel offered to wrap them. Everyone stood round for 5 minutes while she became a flurry of tissue paper, ribbon and glitter. Asher took the package from her, tucking it under his arm. Yancey inquired about purchasing a broom, changing his order to 2 brooms once he realised they were gnome-sized. He also took Simmel up on the offer of free gift wrapping. Once outside, Callie asked him what he planned to do with the brooms, thinking perhaps there was a plan to create something magical. Yancey shrugged and told him he had no idea. Callie remarked that cleanliness and godliness often went together, and Yancey responded that he did like tidiness, but didn't have OCD&D. Purchases made, the group decided to bypass the carpenters and head to the lathe and grain. As they walked, Cora spotted llama tracks and decided to follow them. Asher, having made friends with the llama previously, decided to accompany her. The rest made their way into the tavern, Yancey and Callie having to hunch over as they were unable to stand upright. Yancey was first to approach the bar behind which a male gnome was working. A few other gnomes were seated at tables, but the tavern was by no means full. The gnome, Calzon Hagglebeard, stared up at the half-orc with apprehension in his eyes, before realising he must be part of the group who'd helped out Bramble Swiftshot. He offered the room keys and warned Yancey that the beds may be a little small for the taller party members. Yancey took them and joined the others at a table, taking a drink for each of them as well. Whilst they were seated, he extracted his brooms from their extravagant wrapping and removed the head from one, lashing the 2 handles together to create 1 regular-sized broom. Cora and Asher, meanwhile, followed the llama tracks in a northerly direction. It was not long before they came across a pool of calm water surrounded by large standing stones. In front of it stood a tall humanoid, large antlers sprouting from either side of a furry head. The figure wore robes, the hemline finishing at the ankles, revealing furry hooves. They appeared to be feeding the llama and stroking it. As the halfling and the human approached, the figure turned. It was the first time either of them had laid eyes on a satyr. "Hello. Welcome to the Moon Grove." Cora asked who he was and a little more about the grove. "My name is Arundor Dearborn, and I'm the keeper of the Moon Grove. The druids here maintain it. Sometimes if you go into the pool, it might give you a vision. It's best done at night. You're welcome to come back and take a dip." Cora chatted for a little, then went over to the llama, who immediately nuzzled her. She and Asher returned to the lathe and grain. The tavern was filling up, nobody batting an eye as the pair walked in with the llama. It was easy to spot their party, the tall figures standing out against the clientele, which was mostly gnomes with a few halflings. Bjorn was tucking into a delicious-looking stew. Yancey was also eating, and Callie was looking sternly at Bjorn as Zinna cried quietly. The food had been brought over. Bjorn and Yancey had both begun eating with vigour, but Zinna sniffed the meat suspiciously. Callie was perceptive enough to realise that it was rabbit. He told Yancey, who stopped eating. Bjorn, oblivious, polished off his portion and made a start on Zinna's. Signalling a barmaid, Callie asked if they could have a plate of vegetables. She looked at them suspiciously, asking if they were a group of those. Callie replied that they were not vegan and indicated Zinna. Realising her terrible fox pass, which Callie attempted to correct, she hurried out. Cora and Asher joined the table as a large plate of unwashed carrots, clearly just ripped out from the ground, were brought out. Zinna nibbled one sadly, her ears drooping. The busy tavern was growing more rowdy as a male gnome stepped out onto a small stage. With a top hat and leathers, he began to play the guitar. The crowd went wild. Callie and Asher headed up to their respective rooms, shortly followed by Zinna with a plate containing a few carrots. Cora, Yancey and Bjorn stayed drinking for another hour before Cora decided to turn in. Yancey became quite drunk, Bjorn looking at him in amusement as he felt absolutely fine. Yancey crawled up to bed, being too tall to walk up the stairs, sweeping his room floor with his new broom before lying down to sleep, the bed too small for his half-orc form. It was another solid hour of drinking before Bjorn began to feel any effects. He scanned the room for any halfling females he could approach, not being a fan of gnomes. He spotted a brown-skinned halfling standing in the doorway leading to the upper floor. He made his way over, greeting her flirtatiously. She did not respond, but he didn't get the impression she was ignoring him. Not used to his charms failing, he tried again. It was only after about 15 minutes that Bjorn gave up on trying to seduce the end of a banister. He made his way up the stairs, muttering, "lesbian," under his breath. They all took a long rest. Callie was the first to descend to the main room the following day. It was empty, save for a lone gnome eating at a table. He ignored the figure, heading to the bar. This time a female gnome was in attendance. She apologised again for serving rabbit the previous evening and took on board Callie's persuasive suggestion that she make amends somehow. Bjorn, his head pounding, staggered down and sat away from the others, feeling ashamed having overheard this and realising what he'd been eating in front of Zinna. Asher, Cora and Yancey also came down. Zinna was the last to arrive. Breakfast was brought out, bowls of a rice and cream concoction. A plate with a cake on it was brought out for Zinna. Never having seen a cake before, she whispered to Cora, asking what it was. Cora told her she could eat it. It was nice. It was sweet. And Zinna stuck a paw into it. The cake was soft and moist. Then she felt something unexpectedly hard. Not knowing any better, she pushed the handful of cake into her mouth. It was sweet and delicious, and she realised it was a carrot cake. The gnomes, however, did not seem to be entirely familiar with the recipe and had baked raw carrots into a sponge. None of the group bothered with the lone gnome, who finished eating and left, unnoticed. Breakfast done, it was time to go back to the smithy and collect their goods. They walked in to find Hefty putting the finishing touches to the shield. She looked as though she had been awake all night. As they entered, she looked up, bringing the items over to the counter. She presented Callie with his shield, which was now a +1 shield, and 4 copper arrowheads. She passed 2 iron arrowheads over to Zinna, explaining that the quality of the metal hadn't been great and some had broken in the process. She then disappeared, reappearing with an object under a cloth which she carefully placed on the counter, and then, with a proud flourish, removed the cloth. It was Yancey's mace. Probably. As requested, it now had a big purple head. The metal shaped to look something like Yancey. Not quite what Callie had in mind, but it looked good with purple spikes protruding sharply from it. Around the handle were engraved some flowers. On closer inspection, they were quite vicious-looking, not the kind you'd put in a bouquet. Yancey was astounded, thanking her profusely. She fluttered her eyelashes and told him he could thank her properly by buying her a drink sometime. Yancey blushed, his green skin taking on a hue not dissimilar to the head of his mace. She said they could come back any time, but not today. He needed to sleep. The group decided to make their next stop Acorn Manor to call on Lord Oaknut. As they approached, only Cora was able to pick up on the sound of a baby crying. She knocked on the door and a harried-looking halfling female answered, the sound of crying becoming audible to everyone as she opened the door. Cora explained why they were there, and they were ushered into a comfortable drawing room. On a halfling-sized armchair sat a male gnome, his head in his hands. He looked up as they entered, his eyes bloodshot with sleep deprivation.
I am Lord Dongle Oaknut. Thank you for coming to see me.
Apologies for the noise. My son will not stop crying. I heard how well you dealt with the situation for Bramble, and was wondering whether you could scope out the ruins to the northeast of it. We haven't been able to go there for over a year now, and I'm not sure if it will be safe, what with those strange water creatures appearing.
Callie brought up the subject of payment, and Dongle indicated a jewel-encrusted bowl which he could give them, Callie said it would do for a start, but Yancy, being a cleric and knowledgeable about certain spell components, recognised that the bowl would be worth about 1,000 gold pieces and would be well worth having. Callie agreed and asked whether Lord Oaknut could get a discount with the blacksmith. Dongle looked horrified at the prospect, asking whether they had actually met Hefty. Yancy replied that she seemed lovely and showed him his post-glow-up mace. Dongle replied that nobody got a discount from Hefty. As this discussion was going on, the screaming continued. Yancy asked whether they could see the baby.
Absolutely,
came the response, as Dongle went to another door and opened it. His wife, a halfling named Hazel, came in, carrying a tightly wrapped and furious bundle. Conker Oaknut was red-faced and screaming. Hazel looked even more tired than her husband. Yancy cooed at the baby, who reached out and grabbed one of his tusks. Yancy spoke, careful not to bite the infant hand now gripping onto him. Hazel was all too happy to hand her son over, the orchid visage having an oddly calming effect. Zinna, never having seen a baby before, hopped up to look. She found her ear caught in the other tiny fist, Conker tugging it gently, entranced by the soft fur. Dongle continued the discussion with the others, stating anything they may find at the ruins they could keep. Agreements made, the party left, Yancy handing Conker back somewhat reluctantly. As they left, he shut the front door a little too hard, the yowling starting up with renewed vigour. Yancy cast Lesser Restoration on Bjorn, removing the effects of his hangover, telling him the first one was free. Cora spotted the llama, whom she named Dally, standing outside the manor. She went to pet him, noting there was an envelope in the basket on his back. She picked it up, opening it and removing a folded letter from it. It was a request for them to come and talk with Esther Dingleberry. She tucked the note into her pocket, the group deciding they would prioritise the ruins. They decided to avoid passing by the lathe and grain, Bjorn feeling in the mood for another drink now that he was no longer feeling so rough. The path took them by the Moon Grove. They all spotted Arundel seated in the grass, his eyes open but staring unfocused, meditating. Zinna, curious, hopped up to him.
Well, hello. You're not from this place, are you?
She told him no, she'd fallen through. He was also from the Feywild. Then he noticed Cora.
You didn't come to see me last night. Perhaps another time. I'm always here.
Cora decided there might be time to take a little dip in the pool before they headed off. Arundel told her she could, though it often worked best at night. The others gathered round as Cora began to step into the pool. Unlike naturally occurring water, it did not gently slope into deeper water, but was a sudden step into the deeps. The others watched as the halfling disappeared under the surface. And this is where we will leave them. For now.